Welcome to the Beautiful Game Plan podcast, produced by Focus Shift Films and sponsored by Welsh sports fans. I'm your host, Daniel J. Harris. I'm a filmmaker and entrepreneur working across sport, and I'm a huge fan of sports content. This podcast is my chance to meet amazing people who are doing amazing things in the sports content space and to share their stories with you in the hope that it inspires ideas. On this episode, I have the amazing Aimee Howells, who for 2 decades has been working on the global business stage in and around major sports brands like Manchester United. Aimee, welcome to the Beautiful Game Plan podcast. Can you tell us how you got started working in sport?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my start in sport wasn't probably a natural one, to be honest. Obviously, I grew up in South Wales and had ambitions, one, to go to university, which isn't always offered to everybody. You know, I was very fortunate to go to university in the first place, and it was when South Wales were having an initiative to try to retain talent within Wales. So I was lucky that I went to Cardiff University and the government actually paid for my tuition fees. So it got me to that step into education, which I wasn't really expecting, but absolutely was there to enjoy and to flourish at. Off the back of that, I actually met a guy in a pub who offered me a job in advertising. I did an English and psychology degree at Cardiff University, but it definitely wasn't a pathway I was expecting to go into advertising. And then when I got my degree results, lo and behold, I got enough to be able to start that job in advertising, which I did. So off I went to Cheltenham to take on my first role as an account executive for an agency. And then off the back of that, had a pathway opportunity to come to Manchester to work for a global ad agency called Cheatham Bell JBT. Now, when I was at that agency, very much working WPP network, kind of big global ad agency, and I then ended up becoming somebody that worked with a series of kind of like startups, I guess, which again, I wasn't really expecting to go from a very fully fledged kind of quite comprehensive business structure to being, you know, the first person to be employed by a geo that were going out and doing it on their own. And that became a pattern of behaviour for quite a few years, really. Well, a lot of years, probably about 6 or 7 years, until I landed a job at an agency called Ear to the Ground, which at the time was a music production company, but had some sways into thinking about what does fandom actually really look like across music and sport. So we started doing collaboration pieces around kit launches, of which I then ended up working on a kit launch for Manchester United with Nike, called The Threads That Weave. So it was very much working around Cottonopolis. It was the Gingham kit. I don't know if you remember it all those years ago. And it was kind of a change in pace where we worked with a poet called Mike Gary to actually deliver a really wonderful piece of poetry to launch the kits. Off the back of that, that was my first kind of introduction into sport. And then, you know, my pathway then took me to working at Manchester United in global sponsorship. So yeah, that's how I got there. So it wasn't a traditional route by any means of it. But yeah, it was an interesting route to get there. But yeah, one hell of a journey.
That sounds amazing. And the linking of psychology and advertising, I think that's a very important link, the psychology of choice. Why do people make the decisions they do? How can you tap into their subconscious? Did that kind of factor in your work within the ad world?
Yeah, I guess so. And I think actually even more so as time went on when I started delving into the world of fan engagement and fan culture, because really for me, as I said, the linear relationship, lots of people, when they end up working for a football club particularly, have got a real passion around football. For me, actually, it was around that social impact of football and fan engagement around, you know, why do people love the things that they love? And I think, you know, that can be applied to, you know, shopper marketing as much as it can be applied to, you know, why when you listen to your favorite song at a gig, do you have those moments of liminality? To why are then digiboards, you know, more susceptible when a goal is scored in front of them? So all of these things connect, don't they, in terms of how psychology and how the human brain kind of, you know, opens up to new messages when they are in the utmost position of enlightenment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think football's an amazing space for creating content and engaging with fans and kind of linking products with key moments and stuff like that, because the way that a football fan kind of works is if you support that club, you want you want to kind of collect everything from that club. So whether it's the shirts, whether it's the kind of bumper stickers, whether it's the key ring, whether it's a poster on the wall, there's almost an addiction to kind of want everything linked to that club. There's such a powerful connection between fan and brand, and I think there's interesting ways to explore that, create content, create products, like I say, linked to key moments or key times, or nostalgia is a very important tool as well, isn't it? So you link a feeling with a kit, with a time period, with a product, and all of a sudden that fan's like, I've got to have that. And like I did something similar with Swindon Town last year. We created a limited edition vodka, and the bottle was branded in the same sort of style and colours as their playoff win when they went into the Premier League 30 years ago, and it was the anniversary of that kind of 30 years. So creating a promo bit of content then that had the highlights from that playoff game at Wembley where Swindon won, with the bottle and shots of that at their stadium. I think there was a couple hundred bottles, and the promo went out at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, and by Monday, I think 97% of the stock had sold. And it's that linking in their brain between one of the most amazing times you've ever had in your life, watching your team go up, 30th anniversary, and this product. And vodka has absolutely no link with that Wembley win, but the styling in the bottle just kind of gets those thoughts processing and linking that nostalgia with that product, and then that need to buy.
I think nostalgia is a really interesting one when it comes to those kind of like emotional triggers. And I think the same could be said, obviously looking back at advertising, when we go through national recessions, there's no coincidence that the old Bisto ads come out, right? Because it gives you this feeling of comfort. So, it's not because they can't afford to do new advertising campaigns. They take you back to that place of feeling safe. And that emotional trigger between, as you say, nostalgia and, my gosh, football is full of it, right? Absolutely full of it. The ability that football has got to kind of evoke emotions, but also help drive action, I think is really interesting, whether it be purchasing a product or being involved in a movement or being part of something greater than the sum of one. And I suppose that's really kind of what I experienced working at Manchester United, working on the global stage with Chevrolet. Chevrolet's marketing strategy wasn't necessarily about selling cars. It was about how did they create corporate social responsibility impact programs globally, and whether that be creating a football pitch in an unpacified favela, or creating campaigns like Name Swap, where we brought children over from disadvantaged backgrounds from around the world to actually be on pitch to help kind of drive the agenda of visibility of that, or whether it be kind of the female moment, where actually one year we did a whole campaign all based around young girls for the first time, which was all young girls coming to the stadium to actually do that name swap moment and be mascots. So I think, the power of sport to drive social change and drive kind of action is absolutely at the heartbeat of everything that can be delivered with that completely.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet. Just want to take you back to Manchester United. So it's one of the biggest clubs in the world. It's had some of the most amazing players in the world. What was it like working there? What was it like the first day when you walk in the door? Where were you based at the stadium? Were you based at the training ground? Were you mixing in amongst the players and the manager and that sort of thing? What was life like working at one of the biggest clubs in the world?
I mean, gosh, what an overwhelming brand to work for. It's not just obviously one of the biggest football clubs, it's one of the biggest commercial brands of the world. So, that first day, obviously being somebody from a working class family, very overwhelming, a little bit of imposter syndrome, I'm not going to lie, because, it's not a world that I'm used to. Even though I'd had that kind of background in advertising, it's definitely not the level of stage that I'd been used to kind of performing on from a business perspective. But my gosh, what opportunity. So yeah, my office was actually above the megastore, so actually in the stadium. But everything I was doing for Chevrolet and a couple of other brands like Uber, so when Uber was the global partner, meant that I spent a lot of time abroad. So a lot of time working out the States, a lot of time in China, India, South Korea, really understanding how to collapse the distance between the stadium and the global fan base. So obviously, there's only really a couple of % of fans that ever get to come to the stadium and experience the kind of like relationship at the stadium firsthand. So it's really our job to think about how do we embrace all fans to help them get closer to the thing that they love, and that was Manchester United. So yeah, I was very fortunate working for a principal partner like Chevrolet, that we had premium access to players. We very, very fortunate in that sense, because that's obviously what people wanted to connect with, is that kind of top couple of players that are kind of either have the visibility, the performance, but also the that kind of role model profile that kids look up to, like Paul Pogba, for example. So yes, did a lot of work with the players, which was highly exciting, very overwhelming, but yeah, what a job.
Fantastic. And I suppose, is that the big challenge at somewhere like Manchester United is you talk to a global audience. Like, for example, I've done a lot of stuff with the Welsh FA. Obviously, your audience are Welsh people, people in Wales. There's a certain sense of national pride and things you can tap into and engage with that audience. I know with Cardiff City as well, the majority of their fans come from within a certain distance of Cardiff. So you're kind of talking to a very kind of local set of people, all from a similar sort of place with a similar sort of background, similar sort of knowledge, kind of quite broadly. Whereas Manchester United, you're not kind of talking about engaging with just the people in and around Old Trafford, Salford, and stuff like that. You're talking to people in China, you're talking to people in America, you're talking to people in South America, you're talking to people in probably hundreds of different languages. Is that the big challenge when you're at a club like that?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't, yeah, and understand the power of the fan base when you actually step into a market like China, when you're doing an I Love United, pop-up screen experience, for example, when you're doing a pop-up party, or Jakarta or somewhere like that, when you see the overwhelming fandom there, and they're wearing shirts from all times, you know what I mean? Like usually when you're at the stadium, it's the latest kit, but you see all the nostalgia, all of the kind of emotional connection, all of the kind of aged connection when you're in market is a complete eye-opener. And as you say, it's like the global audience is bigger than it is in Manchester. You know, obviously we've got Man City here as well, right? So we've got a little bit of competition. But yeah, in terms of the global profile of the audience, and that holds a responsibility for sponsors for sure, in terms of what type of content they're creating, because you can't just look at content through a lens of what works for one type of demographic. You've got to start considering, well, what's actually going to resonate with the rest of that fan base, or you start thinking about how do you create kind of like targeted campaigns that really kind of resonate. So for example, Chevrolet had General Motors Shanghai as well, so a separate part of the business, which is purely about the Chinese audience. So our strategy around China was incredibly different to what it would have been to, India or, America. The Americas weren't massively engaged at the time. Obviously we spent, pre-season tours over there, making soccer more accessible. It's definitely made a mark now. So yeah, trying to kind of take into consideration a global fan base and what's going to make them tick was absolutely textured, really exciting, but very tricky because, when you're a rights holder, you only have a certain amount of rights to sell to sponsors. So you're having to share those rights. And when it comes to creating content, there's only a certain amount of space on social channels for all sponsors to get involved. So one, getting access to players, two, getting visibility and getting approval to go on platform. Three, if the performance of the team isn't brilliant on match day and you've got planned content for the next day, that's scrapped. So you've got to deal with all of these things. And then when you're going out with amazing content, it only takes one fan that's not of Manchester United to put a trigger in the feed that everyone then goes off on a big kind of, rant about something that's nothing to do with the content. So you can't really look at sentiment as well as you want to either. So, content actually is probably one of the trickiest things to actually kind of get right in lots of different ways.
Sponsored by Welsh sports fans and their award-winning Riverside Sports Bar, an American-style sports bar with a distinctly Welsh feel. Great food, great atmosphere, and all the sport, as well as a range of Welsh products at Wales' #1 sports bar.
Yeah, it could be an absolute minefield on social media, can't it? One person throws something in there, and all of a sudden, your best laid plans of your content go out the window, and it's now kind of damage limitation because someone started something completely irrelevant or kind of not needed. And I suppose the other thing you mentioned there is the on the field as well. How difficult is it to align the on the field with the off the field? You're kind of planning content, you're planning strategy, but if the team doesn't win on Saturday, or there's a poor performance, or a certain player has performed well, that has a knock-on effect to what you're doing off the field. And it might not be the case that content goes out, so that content can completely scrapped. You then have to reimagine your entire strategy to align with something that's happened on the field.
Yeah, totally. And also, the club's got got to protect the players as well at that point, because, if the players, underperformed on the pitch, and then we send out, some content with like a comedic thread to it on the Monday morning, and be like, why is he joking around? You know what I mean? He didn't perform on Saturday. Why is he joking around? The context from a fan's perspective isn't as aligned as ours is it, from a commercial standpoint? So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in terms of that protection models. And it's, you know, it's actually very difficult really to predict what that could look like. Obviously, as the season matures, it's even more tricky because the training schedule gets closer and closer together. The opportunity to kind of access players gets leaner and leaner and leaner. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to content, which is why I think, you know, those kind of sponsorship alignments need to be so authentic, and there needs to be other ways to imagine how that sponsorship can come to life. You know, not necessarily just through content, you know, through the movements that we make. And I think that's the thing when we worked with Chevrolet, is that what else can we do in market that can show that global impact that doesn't necessarily rely on social media as heavily as it would for, you know, other parts of the business where, as I said, we're doing amazing stuff by, you know, as I say, you know, leaning on that, kind of creating a football pitch and an unpacified favela in Rio, you know, in conjunction with an NGO. So how can we actually become more kind of social purpose driven rather than just social media driven?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that there are a lot of clubs, especially at a lower level, can do a lot better. If you make it about the club, the community, the ethos of the club and the community, what happens on the pitch is almost secondary, isn't it? Because it's, you are a fan of this club, we are this type of club, we are this type of community, and we are doing all these great things. We are supporting local kids or schools or charities or whatever it is. Then what happens on the pitch almost becomes secondary or a bonus to what's going on in terms of who you are as a club, as a brand, and being part of your community. And I think with Manchester United, you're then doing that on a global stage, which then makes it even more complicated, I think. But how do you do that? How do you make sure that you are the substance is there below the kind of football of the club? How do you do that on a global stage?
Yeah, I think it's getting more and more tricky, that conversation for me. And I think, you know, I think the business of sport and what goes on the pitch sometimes is actually getting further and further connected than it ever has been before. You know, ownership of football clubs has changed. You know, I think, you know, the kind of the care of the athletes and the care of the fan sometimes has changed in dynamics with that change in ownership. So actually, I think now if I was working for a football club, I think it'd be even more challenging to understand how to bridge that gap. You know, it's been a few years since I've worked at Manchester United now. But, you know, the thing that I see now through the work that I do is that disconnection actually presents an opportunity of how actually we can be bigger with corporate social responsibility and how we can help drive change on behalf of community, of player, and help clubs kind of reestablish themselves a little bit as community beacons, where sometimes they might have ended up being a bit more detached as they've become like the playground of the rich. It's like, how can we bring that club to have connection back into its kind of like community and local ecosystem? And I think there's a job to be done there from my point of view.
Yeah, and I think Wrexham are doing that quite well.
Amazingly well.
You know what I mean? It's like watching Welcome to Wrexham. Rob and Ryan are obviously two Hollywood stars that have bought a Welsh football club, but there's all the different people around the club. There's those kind of unsung heroes, those supporters that have been there for decades, that have been through the rough ride of the lower leagues and are still there supporting their club. And Welcome to Wrexham is as much about them as it is about two Hollywood celebrities coming in and running the club. And I think that's what increases that engagement, because that's the authenticity. That's the real people behind the club. They are the stories that it doesn't matter who you support. You can engage with those characters because they are the everyman. Do you know what I mean? The every person. They're those that are committed to supporting their club. And it's not so much about Rob and Ryan. It's about that community around that club.
Yeah, but it's also a very interesting growth tactic in terms of fan bases, right? So if I think about my mother, because obviously, you know, I'm from South Wales, my mum's actually from North Wales originally. And, you know, she's now a fan of Wrexham, right? She doesn't really understand what's going on the pitch. She doesn't really care. But what she really cares about is that these two celebrities have come in and helped Wrexham grow. So it's kind of taking her back to kind of like a place of like societal pride and community, even though she doesn't live there anymore. You know, she's kind of feeling that. But also, what a wonderful way to open up football to new audiences through very compelling content. And we know that audiences are dwindling. We know that audiences are changing shape. So actually, what better way to do that by looking at a community strategy to get that community and the extended community behind that movement, but also looking at a global entertainment strategy to say, well, actually, let's hotspot on the things you might not know about football, less of the high octane, more about the spirit, and actually how can we broaden out audiences, and especially when it comes to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because they're very value-based, it's not just about kicking the ball, it's about what values are they aligning with. So I think it's a really clever strategy through a very intelligent content play to say, let's open up new audiences, let's get people involved. And also, as you say, let's kind of highlight some of the storytelling that might not have been told before. So, absolutely hats off for them. They've absolutely nailed that, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. And the visibility of Wales on a global stage, like the US is an amazing kind of audience that everyone's trying to tap into. And now all of a sudden, Wales is more visible in America than it's ever been. It's like Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have done more for Wales on the global stage than the Welsh government has been able to achieve, not through no fault of their own, but they've just opened up kind of Wales to the world, and all of a sudden now people understand where Wales is, where Wrexham is, kind of a little bit of our football history, our flag, our language, our food, all sorts of things. And Paul Mullin is now in the most recent Deadpool film as Welsh Pool. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's mental how visible Wales is on a global stage, and especially in America, off the back of this.
100%. Let me tell you, when I first accepted the job at Manchester United, my mum turned to me and said, "Oh, darling, but the ball's the wrong shape." Because it was rugby. You know what I mean? The fact that now we're so having this national pride moment, so that global moment around football, not rugby, which actually, in all seriousness, when I was in school in South Wales, the boys, nobody played football. Like, it wasn't even taught. So, how far we come in 20 years to actually be able to put, Welsh football on the global stage, I think is just incredible, and just goes to show the power of that kind of like that change in strategy, that encompassment of community, that lean on that civic entity of a club, that emotional entity of a club, but also that economic impact of that club, and how that can be kind of rolled out in a completely different way. I think wowzers to that. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it brings me on nicely to my next question. So after your time at Man United, you founded Squad Goals. So how did that come about, and what was the driving force behind the setup of that company? So I got a sense that it's going to be kind of value based.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, and Squad Goals has been in development for a while. It's how I work as a consultant, working with startups, but also it's how I'm now kind of going back into the world of sport after maybe having a few dormant years, kind of away from directly working in sport. And I've worked with sports entities for a number of years through different projects. It's how can we really look at the business of sport for social change. I think we talk about sport for social change and the wonderful movements that happen through players and through things that we've just been talking about. But actually, for me, the business of sports, there's a job to be done there in terms of how we can really unlock that. And I think, as I alluded to before, I feel like the business of sport is getting more and more detached from actually what's important. And I think there's a lot to be done in that space. So Squad Goals is really on a mission to think about how we can diversify the business of sport to drive that social change. And there's a number of initiatives that are coming up around that space, which I won't mention quite yet. But there's some very exciting things happening. I've joined forces with two wonderful men who are both ex-footballers to take on the next phase of what this looks like. But maybe we can come back and talk about that another time.
Absolutely. Yeah, you gave me a little bit of an outline of it before we started recording, and my lips are sealed until you're ready to talk about that publicly. But yeah, it goes hand in hand with everything we've talked about today, isn't it? In terms of using sport and using football as a vehicle for societal change, making the world a better place, challenging the kind of class divide, and creating kind of sustainable futures as well, which I think is important.
Exactly that. And I think, obviously coming from, a working class family, it's like, the role of sport that has in communities and in society has the ability to create, social, not just social impacts, but sustainable economic growth, and there's a huge amount of talent being, coming off pitch that can be leveraged to help drive that social change and also kind of feed back into community. And I think we're now at that tipping point. There's enough people in the industry have, talking the same language that, I feel that there's a movement coming, and I think there's lots of moving parts to that movement which will all come together to help drive like a very kind of clear agenda about what that could look like. And I think we're literally at the beginning of something very exciting and very important. And hearing your views about it before we start recording definitely gave me a lot of kind of confidence of the space we're navigating. So maybe there's a 2.0 of this conversation for this podcast with my business partners as well. Very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you're all ready to chat publicly about what you're doing, we can dive on and we can do another one. And as I said to you before, I'd be happy to get involved and happy to work with you guys and share my views and create content. It's very much what I'm about. I think sport is a fantastic place for like changing the world, creating opportunities, social mobility, and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, we're definitely kind of aligned on that. So we've had a little bit of a brief run through of your career, and we talked about your time at Manchester United. I think there's some really interesting things here, and hear what it's like working at a huge club like that, where I'd imagine there's kind of a lot of pressure on. There's a lot of moving parts. It's really interesting. So thank you very much for kind of sharing that with us. Before we go, would you like to tell people where they can find out a little bit more about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously LinkedIn is the common place right now. So yeah, find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I mean, as I said, I can't wait to kind of launch the next stage of where this conversation's going. And I think the work to be done and the amount of talents within sport to help kind of drive agendas and actually put purpose at the heart of what we're doing rather than just commercial. And I think I've worked on both sides of those coins now, and I feel like, for me to be able to unlock real, true commercial value, we've got to put purpose at the heart of what we're doing. And I think once we all start looking through that lens, then, there's a huge amount to be gained from everybody involved. And yeah, let's go forth and conquer.
Absolutely, I'm with you on that. Aimee, thank you very much for your time today. And for those at home that are watching or listening, thank you very much for indulging us. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to the channel for more content.